So shit's gotten interesting, trademark-wise.
Yeah. You want to give the nice people at home and any others that might be
And
watching?
abroad. Yeah, so it seems that Hasbro has filed suit in trademark court, whatever you want to call it, against DC Entertainment over their filing of a trademark for Bumblebee,
Yeah.
an unmodified trademark for Bumblebee as part of the as part of the superhero girls line of toys and building block toys and action figures and etc. You could probably guess why Hasbro's got a little bit of a problem with that.
Yeah. And the situation is not entirely as most people seem to think it is, including
Yeah,
a lot of news outlets that should know better. But
yeah. Well, trademark is a weird and IP law is a weird and complex and often gray zone thing, but there are patterns, there are precedents, there are general just you can
there's
generally suss out what
there's
is
a lot of it
defensible and
comes
what
down
isn't.
to when there's actual decisions being made. It does come down to the individual circumstance and what the lawyers can convince the judge of.
Yeah.
But there are certain patterns, and as you said, and certain elements that are pretty common. And this is not our first time watching a trademark fight with Hasbro, so we know how a lot
No.
of this goes down.
And this is also not the first time that Bumblebee has been involved in a trademark
Right.
issue. Just to go out of the, it would be good to read at TF Wiki their trademark page. It is a long read, but it is also very full of examples and general advice, some of which we will be going over.
Right. If I can give a quick rundown of some basics, though, that people might not know about
Have
trademark
at
and
it.
how it works. First off, and this is the first thing that you need to keep in mind whenever there is a situation with trademark, is trademark and copyright are not interchangeable terms.
Mm-hmm.
Trademark is different than copyright. Copyright protects a work and its creative originality and so forth. Trademark is specifically a business related right which protects exactly what it sounds like trademarks.
The
Lo-
mark of trade.
right. Logos, names, appearances,
Branding.
branding, yes. And
This is how old Batman serials can be in the public domain. Those old Batman films from the 40s can be in the public domain, but Batman himself is not,
right.
which is a completely different matter, but
Right.
we won't get into that
Yeah, the
too
dealing
much.
with mixed public domain and non-public domain is a little bit big for our current conversation, but
Yeah.
the long and the short of it is that this has nothing to do with like one argument that I seen brought up is people bring up how the fact that Bumblebee from DC is the older of the two characters. This doesn't have any relevance.
No.
Because what that's referring to is typically referred to as prior art. That only applies in matters of patent and in matters of copyright. This is not an argument over that. Unlike copyright, which is almost entirely what you can prove in a court, um, trademark has a registration process and specific guidelines. And trademarks,
And specific
right, trademarks
categories.
only apply for given categories. This is why, for example, there's never been a problem with Megatron car batteries.
This is a
Yes,
real
there's
thing
a
that
brand called
exists.
Megatron car batteries. And in regard to what's going on here, Bumblebee tuna is also irrelevant to this process.
Hmm.
Where
Hasbro is not in the process of
right.
making tuna.
Hasbro makes action figures, though, and they have, after a extensive amount of effort, reclaimed the Bumblebee trademark in 2007, I want to say it was? 2006.
2006. There was the 2006 because there was the classic.
And they are hanging on to that like mad because it is one of their flagship characters.
I would dare. You could make a good argument that Bumblebee is now the face of the Transformers franchise more than
Yeah.
Optimus.
Yeah, you could.
At the very least, they are neck
Mm-hmm.
and neck.
And
And yeah, since 2000, since the movie, since 2007, Hasbro has produced. I'm willing to bet hundreds. I could not be arsed to count because there's so fucking many. They have produced hundreds of toys with marked with the trademark Bumblebee with no modifications, and then many times with modifications over the last 10 years. They have very consistently used the word Bumblebee in a trademark that they registered it. It became a registered trademark in 2015, in
mm-hmm.
fact, which is a higher level of protection because they've been able to prove we've done it for this long. Here's more money,
Right.
basically.
The registration is something you have to purchase from the government, and it's a filing where you have officially filed that you are going to use X trademark for X, X, and X purposes. And where this is running into problems is that Hasbro has gotten this for this trademark for entertainment as well as action figures, and specifically they also have a specific trademark category they get for action figures convertible into other forms. Um,
But also general toys and games. Building blocks
yeah,
is another one. It's a little because they're kind of side tackling Lego in this
right.
one as
They
well.
have
Because building block toys are part of this lawsuit because since 2011 they've been selling building block sets Creo with the trademark Bumblebee,
in
and that's still going. I just picked up like a month ago newly released sets of Creo with Creo Bumblebee. But little history. I also recommend little history with Bumblebee. There was a time when Hasbro could not use the name. If you watch Chris McFeely's, we'll put a recommendation up on this one. Chris McFeely's The Basics on Bumblebee. He goes over that briefly, but the basic upshot is pretty much after Generation 2, I think it was 1995 was the last Bumblebee toy
mm-hmm.
released for a while. Throughout Beast Wars, they didn't use the name. Largely because calling. Here's where one of the issues of trademark is people will have often argued, but isn't Bumblebee a generic word? That doesn't matter in
Right.
context.
The sit
Like, apple is a generic word, and you could not remotely hope to defend trademarking the word apple if you were selling apples. If you're selling computers, on the other hand, which would not normally be called apples, now you got a strong claim, provided nobody else has attempted to name their computers apples. Somebody kind of
mm-hmm.
has. So during Beast Wars, yeah, you wouldn't call any of the Beast Wars characters bumblebees if they weren't, well, bumblebees.
Right.
And that is a very weak
Right.
claim.
And that's
Now, I mean, made up words are more defensible than, you know, common words like bumblebee. Autobot is much more defensible. But again, the context of bumblebee being applied to a robot that converts to a car is
mm-hmm.
pretty strong.
This is something that actually a lot of comic fans should be relatively familiar with to a degree. There are a couple of areas specifically in regard to Marvel and DC where this exact same principle can be applied. For example, I will use the example of Captain Marvel. Both Marvel and DC have Captain Marvel as characters, different characters with the same name. However, the trademark on Captain Marvel belongs to Marvel. So Marvel can make Captain Marvel action figures, Captain Marvel comic books with the name Captain Marvel on the cover, things of that nature. They can make a movie based on the character of Captain Marvel. Whereas,
Named
yeah,
Captain
named
Marvel.
Captain Marvel. Whereas DC could make a movie starring their Captain Marvel, but like the action figures in the comic books, it would probably come under a name like Power of Shazam. Because they own the
Yeah,
copyright on Shazam, but they don't own the copyright on Marvel. Captain Marvel. The
a
trademark on, yeah,
trademark.
sorry, trademark on Captain Marvel. And Marvel Comics as a company does have a bit of an extra bit of leverage in their character being named Captain Marvel because it does fit their overall comic book brand as well. Uh,
Yeah.
Whereas DC purchased their Captain Marvel from Fawcett when they bought Fawcett Comics. Um,
And with Bumblebee, yeah, there was a period where they couldn't use the name. They tried, and another toy company had like Bumblebee swing sets or
yeah,
something. I don't remember the specifics. It's sometimes hard to nail
we
down the
don't know
specifics.
if those swing sets are what actually blocked everything. We know that something did, but it could be anything
Yeah.
from a obscure character named Bumblebee in a major action figure market, even outside of the U.S., making it difficult, or it could have been the swing sets, or it could have been any number of things.
Now, during all this time, they could call during the comics that existed, they could call the character Bumblebee because they weren't making a claim for that name. They could release toys of the character, they just couldn't call
Right.
them Bumblebee,
And
which they did once or twice. Like there was a PVC that they called it like the Autobot espionage team because it was Bumblebee and Spike, and they just didn't claim the name
right.
Bumblebee. During that time, and during the time, also there were Bumblebee keychains that were actually the toy that were the old Generation One toy turned into a keychain, and it was under the trademark Bumblebee. But they could do that because it was a keychain that technically fell under a different category than
Yeah,
toys.
and that
It was a toy with a keychain, but in the eyes of the law,
right.
keychain.
Now there are this isn't to say that you could, for example, make something as like if you were to attempt to trademark Pokemon for anything outside of Pokemon, you would be stomped flat. Uh,
Yeah, also because Pokemon, the whoever, it's not Nintendo. What's the name? It's not strictly Nintendo that owns Pokemon, or it is, but it's under a subsidiary Game Freak or
yeah,
something. I
or
think.
Pokemon Company. That's a little bit outside of my.
Yeah, well, the owners of them have applied for Pokemon across a broad swath of categories. Outback Steakhouse does the same thing. Outback actually owns trademarks for the name Outback in toys, which is why the character of Outback hasn't been named Outback since
Yeah,
1986.
they
He's now
yeah they
Fallback.
they maintain that trademark just so that they can sell something in their gift shop if they feel like it.
Yeah, they put and they trademarks can be lost if used and not rigorously repeatedly used. So Outback puts out just enough stuff in the relevant categories
Mm-hmm. They they they
to
they put out just enough licensed crap to keep their trademark solid. This is
yeah.
also something that we noticed that Hasbro did frequently through the Unicron trilogy years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was one year in which what did they release 6 Prowls?
Something
Yeah, and that was
like Prowl and Mirage were the
mhm,
two big ones that they went to a
yeah. They wanted to
lot.
make sure that those names, being ones that could very easily be taken, and would be of value to any number of toy companies. They're cool names. Uh,
Yeah.
Plus, they have to keep an eye on Mirage because every comic book company has a character named Mirage.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Probably one or two named Prowl themselves, or Prowler, or some variant of it. Um,
Yeah.
but like even the Incredibles has a character named Mirage. Uh,
And some people have noticed that, well, can't they just call Autobot Bumblebee? Well, yes and no. Like, we have Autobot Jazz because apparently we have Autobot Jazz. There was at least a 7 year gap in
Hmm.
Jazz toys released in the US. And names like Prowl, Mirage, Jazz are fuzzy,
Yeah.
let's call it. They're a little slippery. They're a little harder to hold on to. So, like with Prowl and Mirage, Hasbro has used them consistently for a period of almost every
Right.
year after a point. So they can very easily point to that. When you've got a 7 year gap, not
It's
so
why
much.
Ratchet, Jazz, and a bunch of others have Autobot in front of their names.
Or
Right.
Decepticon. It's that they don't think that they have a firm grip on the name itself, but they can go Autobot Jazz. And that's a pretty decent grip, and it would also mean that anybody who wants to use the word jazz as part of a compound trademark like
Mhm.
that, a compound word trademark, would need to make sure it stays the hell away from sounding enough like
Yeah.
Autobot Jazz.
They would.
You couldn't go with Robot Jazz. That would
Mhm.
be
You might. Someone would have an
that's
easier time getting away with Jazz Box versus. Uh, yeah.
yeah. Like Frenzy, the is now Decepticon Frenzy because let's face it, they could, feeding Frenzy it would be a very common name for
Mhm.
toys and games or whatever like
Another
that.
one that nearly
So
every comic book company has a character with Frenzy in their name. Uh,
yeah, so in those cases, it's not necessarily that they would lose the name otherwise. It's just that they
and
might.
it makes it safe, it makes it
They
easy.
might.
And if they ever get a chance to lock down the full version of it, surely they will. But
Yeah, and like I remembered that they're now calling like we have Onslaught back, but Hasbro also produces Marvel toys and produces, a Marvel's
mm-hmm.
Onslaught that they call Marvel's Onslaught because they have the
Yeah,
agreement. So should the rights to Marvel toys shift over at some point, Marvel will probably retain the Marvel's
mm-hmm.
Onslaught
In the area of toys.
of
If
toys. Yeah.
it would be a very different thing, again going back to categories, if Hasbro were to attempt to, through IDW, publish an Onslaught miniseries.
Yeah. So this is kind of where things. It's kind of a long-winded primer on trademark and IP. Now, with this case in particular, I am almost convinced that this is DC attempting a wedge,
Mm.
attempting to force a crack in Hasbro's ownership of this name. And I've seen people go, "Well, this Hasbro's being over paranoid. Hasbro Bumblebee, and DC Bumblebee don't look anything alike." Again, that doesn't really matter.
What happens if Hasbro
It's a
decides to
question.
do the Equestria Girls thing with its Transformers cast at some point? That that
Yeah, well,
that
not
sounds
even
far
that.
fetched. That sounds
Well,
far
that's one,
fetched.
yeah.
But I bet you someone in the company has asked that question.
Or what happens if DC and their toy partners decide that now the superhero girls need to have robot
Yeah,
suits?
there's another problem potentially. And the other thing is, it's just they fought hard to get that name. Uh,
Trademarks not defended are trademarks
mhm.
lost. If DC can point to this case and go, well, you didn't defend your trademark when you didn't defend our attempt to trademark Bumblebee without any modification, then that means you must not want a very good hold on it. And a judge will look at that and go, yeah, what's up with
Mhm.
that?
What I think it.
I mean, it's a bit of a parent. I will say this, it sounds paranoid at first
Oh
blush.
yeah.
But this is how these corporations will work and think. Hasbro, this is a case that could, if it goes tits up for Hasbro, means they can't name a toy Bumblebee. Whether they can't name it Autobot Bumblebee, they can't name it, anything like
They're
that.
not going to take that risk
And
by
that would
the
be,
risk of not acting if that's a possible consequence.
yeah, that could be catastrophic.
The
if they don't actively defend that
Right.
trademark.
This is again, it's one of those things that if you go into the area of third-party transformers, even though all of them are very clear, well, I won't say all of them, because there are the
Yeah.
glacial bots and a couple of other exceptions. But for the vast majority of them, they're
Yeah.
all clear copyright infringements and design infringements. But the because of the trouble in hunting down the individual third-party manufacturers and the
Especially
especially in
in
China,
China, where they don't give a shit about intellectual property rights of the
yeah,
United
unless you
States.
have the appropriate number of gifts for the appropriate officials and so forth. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, then so basically the only time that I think that they would actually bother to go after somebody is if they felt that it was a trademark threat. Again,
That's
because or if they thought that they were actually going to bite into their business somehow. But
yeah. Well, apparently there was. I've heard apparently there was a retailer hit with a C&D in the UK, but I haven't looked
yeah,
into that.
that's
But that's also kind of
yeah,
tangential. But that's why all these companies never use the Autobot symbol. They never use the Decepticon symbol. They don't. They come up with fake
yeah, because
names.
they
They
all
come up
know
with
enough
alternate
to know
names.
that it's a lightning rod, that it's
They can toe that line. They can kind of dance on the line when it comes to the look of
mhm.
the toy. As soon as they start using legally registered and branded trademarks, they've just opened themselves up for Hasbro to reach down their throat and yank their nuts out through their esophagus.
And this is something where I don't have direct information, but it's a pretty a solid interpolation. In the terms of knockoff toys in general, you would think in most cases they would want to simply attempt to duplicate the official product to fool as many purchasers as possible. But usually they vary the names up. They rename the
Mm,
package to Tortugas Guerrera instead of Ninja Turtles in Spanish or whatever. Uh,
yeah,
this is something that I can only assume is done because trademarks make it easier to hunt you down. Or yeah,
absolutely.
that it's one of those things that if you're copying the trademark, there's no latitude, no leeway. You're gonna get there. There's not that wiggle room that just makes it not worthwhile to hunt down these pack of people who are running factory one-offs at night or whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
But I mean, let's talk about Bumblebee versus Bumblebee and these specifics of the case. Like I said, this is not Hasbro saying you can never name this character Bumblebee. Near as I can, they are objecting very specifically
the
to
use of it,
DC claiming the trait within the categories of toys and games and building
hmm,
block toys, which are two separate
yeah,
jobbers. And this is a case where, as noted, Hasbro absolutely has a mountain of evidence to prove their consistent use over the last decade.
oh yeah,
Whereas the last time I think DC has had a Bumblebee toy of that character and even trademarked under the name Bumblebee. But that was 2004. And yeah, for the Teen Titans line. Amusingly enough, in a 2-pack with Hotspot, which was a Transformers name as well, that they didn't Hasbro was not able to reacquire till what, 2010, something like that.
thereabouts.
Yeah, just a little amusing side note there. And I've just whacked my headset.
Yeah,
But near as I can tell, the best DC can claim that they've used that name is during a period where, honestly, it could have been questionable whether or not they could have had it because Hasbro would have by then.
hmm,
You know, sometimes these things slip by.
yeah. The
You know, Hasbro wouldn't sue DC for using a trade. Hasbro wouldn't bother DC for using a trademark they wanted, but their lawyers felt they
Right.
couldn't get. But like, yeah, you basically got that, and that was decade
Yeah.
prior. I don't think there's been much
Uh,
between then,
in
up until the
in
superhero
terms
girls.
of the Teen Titans figure, the date that I saw about that earlier today was 2005.
Okay.
So it would have been just before Hasbro got their trademark back. And there hasn't really been much else that I've been able to see. Maybe a DC Select figure or something like that. I know there's some stuff that looks like it's coming out soon. They're pushing the character heavy across several different mediums. Because there's
Yeah.
like a Bombshells figure of her coming out, and figures of.
Is it a bombshell or is it a figure or a statue? Because again, those are different
In this
things.
case, It is in the 6.75 action figure line. Yeah.
Okay. Then that's probably
Yeah,
going to be
because
a problem.
they make the Bombshells characters as both statues and action figures. But
Okay.
it's also probable that they're looking at getting her into DC 6-inch line as a general figure, and they are pushing her heavy for superhero girls for obvious reasons. Um,
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I blame them there pushing the character. I mean, no, I just can't blame it. She's a black female character. We need more of that out there.
yeah.
They should push her. I don't contest
Oh
that
no,
one
no. I'm
bit.
just saying that this is probably part of why they have even tried to make a run at this. Is they've got something to
Mm-hmm.
gain. She's being leveraged to be a major archetype player for them for a while. And if you've been paying attention to DC and how, for example, Cyborg has gone from being a B-list character in the comics to being a lead Justice Leaguer in movies,
Mm-hmm.
that's because of things that happened with action figures and cartoons. Uh, that's because an entire generation had the idea of Cyborg as the cool black superhero uh, presented to them through Teen Titans, and
Yeah.
so that raised his particular uh, ranking in the public perception. And Marvel and DC both, they're planning their move. They are planting seeds in their cartoons for movies they want to make 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Everything is a potential
Yeah.
franchise now.
Um.
There's a whole young adult novel bullshit going
Oh
on
yeah,
about
yeah.
that. That's beautiful. It's a I sidetracked, but just an example. We're not going to get into that, but look up that story. It's fucking fascinating.
But
Yeah, like I said, I would not be shocked if DC very deliberately thought we can challenge.
yeah.
We're going to fight this one
NDC might.
because it does also affect Warner Brothers, who owns DC. It does affect one of Warner Brothers' major rivals, Paramount. Because Paramount not being able to do merchandising for a Bumblebee
Yeah,
movie,
that.
that's a knife in
Mhm.
the ribs.
And even on top of that, you've got Hasbro in general also makes their competitors action figures.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that stuff does get that petty. Um,
Yeah. No, no,
yeah.
absolutely.
One thing.
Like I said, it sounds very paranoid and stupid to us, but as I've had to argue in other contexts surrounding Hasbro, we're not monstrously rich megacorporations.
IP is super valuable
They
to these people.
they think they have a very different value system and way of thinking about things and about
A
money.
lot of it is. I kind of just assume they're like a Star Trek race. Like they've got a single like they're an entire species of people with a single facet of their culture that's become everything, and like they're the ones that are
Yeah.
extremely interested in intellectual property law. Um, but
Yeah. Yeah.
the lawyers, at least, they don't
Hmm.
think like people think about these things. It's because they're dealing with it. It's sort of like any time you have any kind of specialized knowledge base. A biologist does not think about living creatures the same way a layperson does. And someone who
Hmm.
lives and breathes IP law does not look at these, and toy marketing does not look at these things the same way the average fan or consumer does. Now, there is another thing that we may see, which I would be interested to see, is I'm wondering if DC might attempt to say that there is a difference between a doll and an action figure.
Well, the only problem is that they have registered that across several. Well, it could be a wedge. I mean, they could decide they will be okay with losing it for action figures, and possibly losing it for brick-based, building
Mm-hmm.
block stuff.
If they can maintain it for superhero girls,
For superhero girl
dolls at least.
dolls, because the superhero girls are an
Yeah.
action figure line.
One other thing that I think is going to, if we're just going to go down to like who has the most to gain, who has the most to lose, Hasbro has the bigger thing to lose. This
Absolutely.
is sort of a situation where I think what we're seeing is that the mouse fights the mouse is typically going to escape because he's fighting for his life, and the fox is just fighting for his next meal. And I think that Hasbro has a lot more to lose and will throw a lot behind the legal battle if they're made to do it. Just
Hmm.
because they're not planning on just making one of those Bumblebee movies. Uh,
No, and it's not just a movie. He's going to be in future movies. He's going to be a major character in future incarnations of
yeah,
Transformers.
he's going to be a major star in the next animated series. That just goes without saying.
He he is one of the two big faces
Mm-hmm.
of the franchise. I mean, it really is. This is basically would be like if somebody was contesting that they have the right to make toys and action figures and whatnot of
Mm-hmm.
Superman, of a character named Superman, and they're
Yep.
not DC.
The
This is saying, hey, I want to make toys called
Yeah,
Batman. What you gonna do?
I think one thing that I do think that ultimately Hasbro is going to walk away from this the victor. Because they've got
Yeah.
just, it's very difficult to make a trademark claim that Hasbro has not thoroughly and continually exploited the Bumblebee name uh, for the
Hmm.
past decade.
I think at this point we need to just have a scroll of the Bumblebee toy page just for the movie
Mm-hmm.
character. Dozens of toys a year, and that's just in the straight up action figure light. Never mind all the merch, all the everything
And
else.
all DC has to do to maintain their character, because there has been some talk that perhaps DC's Bumblebee isn't going to be distinctive enough, but
I wouldn't bet on Hasbro letting
yeah,
that slide if the judgment
yeah.
goes their
But
way.
the nice thing about superheroes is they have human names, and
Mm-hmm.
she can be Karen Bumblebee Breacher or Beecher, and
Mm-hmm.
then they could, you could much more easily protect that as a trademark than you could.
That's what Hasbro does for a lot of
Yeah,
GI
a lot of
Joe.
the GI Joes lost their code names. They are now going by their original names, and that's the other thing is that, again, going back to like trademark battles that Hasbro's been with, there was a period where they didn't have the name the Baroness. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they had periods where they like tons of Transformers and GI Joe names have been lost over the years. Uh,
Eventually regained, largely with the help of major
yeah,
motion
but even
pictures.
then, I mean, there's still a couple of things that a couple of like characters from GI Joe at least that still, when they get releases, their real human name is right there in the trademark. I can't think of any off the top of my head. I don't.
Just because I find GI Joe character names very unmemorable once you get past the code name. I know Outback
Mm-hmm.
is one of them. The guy who was called Outback in GI Joe. I'm not gonna go look it
Yeah,
up right
yeah,
now. And I'm not even sure if Outback is what they call him in the middle of it. I kind of think he
yeah.
is, but
But the thing is that for what? individual fans are going to experience. This will be an interesting fight, but nothing is probably going to change for them.
Mm-hmm.
There'll be maybe.
Worst comes to worst, I really feel like this is going to result in DC, pulling the toys that are branded with branded with Bumblebee, and then replaced with the exact same character, looking exactly the same, just with a heavily modified name. Whether they give her a new code name, call her Stinger,
Mm-hmm.
is generic, but it's also a code name that's generic enough that where they could probably get away with calling her DC's Stinger,
Right.
or something like that. And then she would just be Stinger for superhero
Mm-hmm.
girls.
And you'd be surprised how often these little fights wind up influencing things that you consume, though. The way that legal battles are shaped by trademark and so forth. I know this is drifting off topic, but do you mind if I give a classic example? Do you
Go
know
for it.
why Braniac in DC is a supercomputer?
Can't say I do.
Well, DC Comics originally, the first appearance of Braniac, he's just an alien. He's just a smart alien.
Mm-hmm.
The problem was that a major toy retailer had its own version of what we would call here in the United States erector sets, or what's called internationally Meccano. And they made build a computer kit. They were basically analog calculators and things like that kids could build with the mechanical parts. But they came out under the name Braniac. And Braniac went after DC for trademark. And they settled the lawsuit rather than go through it, and the way that they did that was by providing Braniac, the company, with free advertising in Superman comics, and by making the character Braniac into a living computer, so that he would serve as a form of advertising for the Braniac toys. So,
well, that worked out well for DC.
So the reason that a supercomputer character, a living computer robot, for the longest time looked like a green alien dude with no pants, is because they had just slapped "oh, he's a robot" on the existing green alien dude with no pants. And it was only really like the late 70s, early 80s when they were really doing the superpowers stuff that anyone even during the John Byrne reboot that even Brainiac even looked remotely mechanical. Unless I'm misremembering, I'm not as big a DC person as I am a Marvel person, but I do know a lot of their Gold and Silver Age stuff.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if this ends in settlement. Like I said, Hasbro's case for repeated solid use of the name Bumblebee is about as solid as it can get. I'd be very hard pressed to think of.
Heck, with the tie-in, with all the tie-in merch, I can't think of anything that name hasn't been assigned to, up to and including real-world cars.
Yeah.
Because I've seen people get that particular, I've seen more than one person in Tulsa.
Yeah, there
with
is
that brand of Camaro in the exact Bumblebee colors.
Yeah, there is actually a Bumblebee you can buy from a dealership, a branded Bumblebee custom job Camaro with the Autobot hubs and on the steering wheel and the all that. I would not be surprised if this does turn out to be DC settles, DC poked to bear in the hopes of gaining something. Oh, excuse me. And they don't have as much to lose by settling. But if Hasbro doesn't defend it, holy God, does DC have a lot to gain? And Hasbro has a lot to lose if they don't.
And this is, of course, assuming that everyone's thought this out clearly, because in some cases, you do occasionally get instances where the legal department is trying to justify its own existence and kind of goes
Hmm.
off to find shit to be a nuisance about. Um, but yeah, and the other thing is that these little intellectual property lawsuits, they happen constantly. Uh, Court challenges, lawsuits, like any given movie studio probably deals with a half dozen of them a year minimum. Um,
Yeah. This just happens to be high profile because it
well,
is too
it's two
big.
big nerd properties that are both in pretty much ascension, but
Yeah.
but yeah,
Well, I mean, we just had the legal fight not too long ago over the dire wraiths from
mm-hmm.
Rom.
Oh yeah, there's an entire that's a whole can of worms.
Yeah. And there's the ongoing Harmony Gold stuff, which is a clusterfuck of epic
Oh yeah.
proportions. I've tried. Again, we'll provide a link through a copyright lawyer called Leonard
Oh
French
yeah, I've
on
seen Leonard
YouTube.
French's stuff. He's really good.
Yeah, interesting reading because he finds a case, and there's one video where he reads like a mid '90s Harmony Gold lawsuit, and just the rights to who actually owns the trademarks and whatever in what parts of the country is apparently a gigantic clusterfuck between Harmony Gold and Tatsunoko and like Big
Mm-hmm.
West, and that's just for international
Yeah,
rights. I mean, I think it's clear. I think it's clear who owns it in Japan, but who had the right to license to who, where, outside of Japan is apparently a mess that nobody's really 100% sure of. But god damn it if Harmony Gold isn't going to fight tooth and nail to retain what
well,
they
yeah.
can.
There's a lot of weird stuff with the whole Harmony Gold thing. I mean, I've heard things from the ranging from the fact that Harmony Gold's primary business now is real estate, and they basically sue
Hmm.
people over Robotech to make money on the side. That's because have you seen anything with Harmony Gold?
Not
But
much.
and again, that might just
There keeps
be
being
internet.
talk about stuff,
Yeah,
but
that might just be internet rumor mongering. But the other thing is that one of the big things about the Harmony Gold lawsuit is that it's apparent. One of the apparent problems is that Harmony Gold, at some point, bought distribution rights and kind of assumed that meant they had the right to do derivative properties. And there's a lot of
hmm.
question over whether they had that right ever at all.
Yeah, that was actually kind of common in the 80s. That's how we got
Yeah,
Miss Pac-Man.
yeah.
Bally Midway technically didn't have the right to make Miss Pac-Man or Junior Pac-Man, and there's at least one other. But they did it, and Namco was not terribly thrilled. But Miss Pac-Man was so successful that Namco eventually rolled it into their
Yeah.
product.
And before the internet, it was everything moved at the speed of a fax machine, so it was easier to go unnoticed for a while stuff like that was going on.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's not like it hit the
yeah, I mean
news.
nobody cared. But like, I mean, it goes back to There's always like, I guess the other huge intellectual property thing that people would be that fandom would be interested in is there's the ongoing thing about Arkham Books claiming they own the copyrights on Lovecraft's work when
Hmm.
they don't. I think that was finally proven that they had just assumed they had, but they'd gotten the right to publish them, but they had never actually purchased the rights to the IP itself, and the copyrights were passed on to an aunt or someone who got the whole of the estate. Were never renewed back when copyrights had to be renewed, but they had been essentially suing people over infringement of public domain works for ages. They
So rather like the Happy
Right, where
Birthday
they basically
case.
just figured they could lie to enough judges to say they owned the rights, and
And they had the financial force
right,
to back it up.
and the only thing and basically no one who was going to go after nobody who was out to publish a collection of H.P. Lovecraft stories was going to have the type of muscle, legal muscle and money to fight it, and do the research to
Mm-hmm.
prove no, this was actually never renewed. Until I think someone finally did. I forget who it was, but it was finally brought down, and that's why in the around the early 2000s, Cthulhu was popping up everywhere. Was because
Hmm.
it had finally been confirmed that yes, all of the Lovecraft stories, including Call of Cthulhu, were in the public domain, and that's why that was one of the big pushes behind the resurgence. Was just the fact that it was in the public domain and everyone could kind of latch onto it.
Yeah. And yeah, like simply having the money to simply having the money is a big enough stick. Sometimes, even if you're legally in the wrong. Hello, Disney. We'd really like to be able to put that one Disney riff on
Oh
YouTube.
yeah, yeah.
The cartoon's in the public domain, Disney.
Cartoons in the public domain. It was yeah, because it was. But that's the thing.
How are we
Yeah,
going to fight? Well, between Disney and YouTube.
yeah. How are we gonna fight that? I mean, yeah. Sure, if we wanted to be someone who was settling a landmark YouTube case, totally. But yeah, that's not us. Um, my anxiety disorder having ass is not going to be getting in any kind of row with with the largest share of the entertainment industry.
hmm Let's face it, that's something that class action will have to take out, and there are much bigger fish in
Mm-hmm.
that pond that can merge into a giant class action gestalt. A class action Voltron,
Yeah.
if you will.
Uh, but that's our general thoughts on the Bumblebee row challenge battle.
Yeah. I will say in a bit of bitter that it's very amusing to see fans, complain about how Hasbro has to change their name, change character names as often as they do, and then as soon as we get a story where Hasbro has to sue to maintain the name of one of their biggest characters, the characters that character that fans love and want more of, and were angry that they didn't release toys of them for a better part of a decade, then oh god, Hasbro, you're being
Well,
stupid.
it's also
No.
everybody's. Whenever there's two big geek monoliths fighting, everybody's got a faction
hmm
off, and it's
Well, these are
yeah,
Transformers fans going, God,
yeah,
that's dumb.
yeah. I know.
It's our knee jerk reaction to not liking giant
Mhm.
corporations, which fair. That's fair. I'm not a fan of the system as it
Yeah.
stands
Well, I mean,
myself.
I don't like the current farming system, but I still got to eat. Yeah.
hmm
There's a lot of shit I don't like that I'm still tied into because you don't have a choice. Uh, but yeah, this is just one of those.
If you want Bumblebee toys that are named Bumblebee, unless you want him to be Goldbug forever.
Yeah, it's just such a hard to market name. And the thing is
Mm,
what you were saying earlier is absolutely true. Bumblebee is the face of the franchise for them, up to the point that while he does show up as in a secondary role, the current TV show is a Bumblebee show, with
yeah,
Optimus being involved in a minority of the episodes.
like maybe 20, less than
Yeah,
20%. Hell, Optimus was barely in the last
yeah. I
movie.
mean, it was like, wasn't he dead first season of Red?
Well,
Yeah,
he kept showing up. He
yeah.
was
I mean,
dead, but
he was a
that's
pleasant
not a
ghost,
deterrent.
but that happens from time to time.
Yeah. The current show does a lot to keep Optimus out of the
Yeah,
picture.
it's kind of using him sparingly. I've seen there were times when
hmm
a lot of that happens from time to time when you've got big team things and somebody starts overwhelming. They'll pull them back or they'll uh, use them as a sort of boost. Because the
hmm
only other option you have is Wolverine like overuse, and
Yeah.
nobody's keen on that. But yeah, the general tone of the discussion is do not panic, and
Do not smark.
Yeah, well, I'm.
This is actually a serious. Don't panic, but this is actually a very serious case, and frankly, Hasbro does have a
Mhm.
solid case here.
And yeah, it's one of those things that if you think about the fact that Hasbro can afford to make Transformers movies continually, that they make enough money
Mm-hmm.
that despite the fact that they are in some cases incomprehensible nonsense, but they still make money enough to justify their continued existence, that's all the reason anyone needs to understand why they're filing for this lawsuit. Or this action,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever it wants to be called. Injunction. Legal action.
Well, hell, I'd say that they'd probably, even if Transformers was still in pre-movie, like back when the Unicron trilogy, it was still a solid seller. I'd say they still have a good case for fighting had they been using Bumblebee
Yeah. I mean,
consistently.
it's. If,
The movie just adds an extra 800 pounds to
mhm.
that gorilla.
It would be like if somebody had attempted to come out with a. Like, if Marvel had attempted to revive a minor character called Megatron that was around in the 1960s. You'd probably
Mm-hmm.
see a similar fight. If they were going after putting him in toy lines and things like that.
Yeah.
But but yeah, I think that's. Do you have anything else to add in?
Not really. It's IP law is complicated and annoying and sometimes fuzzy, and that's why people get paid tremendous amounts of. That's why people pay tremendous amounts of money to go to law school to make tremendous amounts of money arguing their cases for companies that have tremendous amounts of money. But you can you can generally get the idea of what is and isn't
Mm-hmm.
defensible,
And we will have.
and you have to
And
fight it. You have to fight these fights, or else you
yeah,
will lose, and there's a lot to be lost.
and yeah, that is the other thing that, yeah, that a lot that has to be brought up is that sometimes these types of legal fights are not optional. There's a penalty to letting things slide. But
Hmm. And if that penalty is potentially losing the capability of naming your top tier character the name that everybody knows, that's kind of a big
yeah,
damn deal.
but so yeah, I think that about covers it. More stuff to come,
Well,
and thank you for showing up.
enjoy.